We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is within the territory of the District 1 Spring Treaty.
Thank you. We are going to begin the session today by having a roll call to make sure that we know the panel members who are here. When I call out your name, please let me know if you're here. And this is a technical check as well. And if you have any conflict of interest. I'll start with you, Ralph.
Here, no conflict.
Next, Paul.
Present, no conflict.
Dima.
Here, no conflict.
Juhi.
Here, no conflict.
Joe.
Here, no conflict.
Gordon.
Here, no conflict.
Jim.
Here, no conflict.
And Heather.
Here and no conflict.
Thank you. So thank you again for participating. What we're going to be seeing today, the Woodbine Secondary Plan Study First Review, it's a study and a city area review, as well as the first review of the secondary plan study. There is 1 hour and 30 minutes scheduled for the review. It's a formal review session with no vote taken at the end. Staff have been given 10 minutes for their presentation. This will be followed by 20 minutes by the consultant, proponent team. Discussion will follow these presentations. This session is being live streamed on YouTube and also being recorded. The recording will be available at City Planning YouTube channel following the meeting. For panel members, got staff questions. Provide commentary on issues of concern and appreciation. Remember that for presenters, I'll introduce a 1-minute warning. It'll be a verbal to let you know that we need to start wrapping up. And finally, we can begin with the staff presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having us. My name is Joanna Kimont. I am the project manager in the official plan and legislation team that is leading the secondary plan study. I have with me today the design manager, Allison Mead, and also Nathan Fetroshin from Parks and Recreation. I also have Andrew Viter in the back supporting the study. To provide a quick overview of exactly why we are doing this study and how the study is being undertaken. It is undertaken by city planning as the development, and the secondary plan study specifically focused on the southeast corner of the larger lands that are commonly referred to as the Woodbine lands. So those larger lands are the lands that are bounded by Highway 427 on the west, Rexdale Boulevard on the north, Highway 27 on the east, and the rail corridor towards the south. In terms of the overall history to describe why exactly we're here today, it's important to first highlight that the entire Woodbine lands were previously designated in the city's parent as employment areas. In 2023, when the city was undergoing its last comprehensive municipal review, and that's a review when various landowners were putting in requests. It is undertaken by when landowners were putting in requests to convert their employment lands to sensitive uses. The owner of the Woodbine lands had submitted a request for the entirety of the Woodbine lands and to designate them from their employment lands to mixed use or regeneration areas. In later that year, City Council had adopted Official Plan 653, which considered the various comprehensive review land request or land conversion requests. And in the case of the Woodbine land, I've converted just the northwest corner of the Woodbine lands, which areas that had retained the southeast corner as in the previous employment lands designation. However, in November of 2023, the city had reached a New Deal agreement with the province that considered a number of big moves across the city that included the Woodbine lands, that included some other areas that were focused on introducing new mixed-use transit-oriented communities. And the focus of the Woodbine lands in particular was based on the catalyst of the development of the new Woodbine GO station. Through the New Deal, the city and the province had agreed to cooperation and collaboration and really an expedited planning process to consider a new land use designation on the southeast quadrant of the Woodbine lands. In January of last year, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing had approved modifications to that original OPA 653 to allow the change of uses in that southeast quadrant of the Woodbine lands to mixed use areas and regeneration areas. And that was done in coordination with the Site and Area Specific Policy 896, which helps to redesignate these lands. The key to note is the area that's identified at the moment as regeneration areas, where on the map before us is represented in the brown color. The Site and Area Specific Policy specifically states that before any sensitive uses can be introduced to the regeneration area, that a secondary plan study has to be completed. And so that's where we are today. So in terms of the overall secondary plan study process, this really began in November of last year. Through the New Deal agreement, there was an agreement between the city and the landowner Woodbine Entertainment Group that Woodbine will be submitting all of the supporting materials, the background materials, to support the city's secondary plan process. Those materials were received by the city at the end of November of 2025, and that really was the initiation of our secondary plan study process. In terms of where we are with the overall phasing of the study, I guess we're just completing phase one that had begun with the initiation of the secondary plan study with the receipt of those materials. We are in the process of establishing key principles to help guide the secondary plan, and those key principles were initially presented to us by the Woodbine team and are really the framework of how we're approaching a lot of our review of the materials. And those will go into greater detail when we have the proponent's presentation. We're in the process of collecting our population and demographic data to determine the types of community services that this area will need. And we are also assessing the infrastructure and transportation needs. And so there is a concurrent infrastructure master plan and transportation master plan that are being worked on alongside the secondary plan. Part of phase one, we also just completed a set of community engagement earlier in March, and community engagement is intended to continue throughout the process of the secondary plan. We are, I guess, entering now phase two, where we're analyzing the various alternative options, particularly related to the infrastructure and transportation master plans. We're developing the draft vision statement and key secondary plan directions that will be reflected in an interim report that is intended to go to the May meeting of the Etobicoke York Community Council. Phase three of the study will likely initiate around fall of this year, where we will then complete our overall study and the analysis that's going into the secondary plan. We'll be incorporating the various amounts of stakeholder and feedback we've received from public engagement, and we will hold a statutory public meeting where the final version of the secondary plan, together with the infrastructure master plan and the transportation master plan, will be presented at community council. And we're targeting likely end of Q1, beginning of Q2 of 2027 for that statutory meeting. In terms of the various secondary plan considerations we're really looking at in terms of developing our overall vision for the secondary plan, we are looking at hard infrastructures. I mentioned there's alongside this work, there's an infrastructure and a transportation master plan that are being worked on. We're looking at the right sizing and the right number of streets, blocks, and parks in terms of the overall public realm network. We're looking at various mitigation measures. You will hear in the proponent's presentation that there are a number of constraints on the site related to its proximity to industry, its proximity to the airport, and the airport constraints are related to both noise and height constraints. We are looking at delivering the appropriate amount of affordable housing and just in general meeting the city's diverse housing needs. We're looking at community infrastructure. This is essentially an area of the city that does not have any development on it currently. We are basically building a brand new community, which will need a complete set of community infrastructure. And that goes alongside employment uses, making sure that this is in fact a complete community that has that balance of residential and non-residential uses. And then, of course, we're also looking at the overall optimal design, which will happen through an urban design guidelines and elements of sustainable development. And so finally, I've more or less underlined it, but in terms of what this overall work will deliver, I mentioned it will result in a final version of a secondary plan. But that secondary plan will be supported by a transportation master plan, an infrastructure master plan, and also urban design guidelines. And so some of the questions that we would like the panel to consider as you're hearing the proponent's presentation is I've mentioned that there are guiding principles, and so there's 7 guiding principles and 7 ideas that were developed by the proponent team. The city has been using these to guide our work, and so we would like to hear from the panel if there's any advice regarding any elements that might be missing or unclear or incomplete in those 7 guiding principles and 7 ideas. The Woodbine team will also present the concept urban structure plan, which is organized around 3 linear common parks or open spaces, parks and pedestrian routes that are intended to provide a connection to the wider landscapes and vistas. Parks are distributed so that each of the 3 neighborhoods is intended to receive a portion of green space. Can the panel offer its view on the overall public realm network, how the parks are distributed, and on the proposed interface between the parks and in particular the park-facing blocks? And then also within the site constraints, I mentioned the various constraints related to industry, noise, and height constraints, which also the proponent will go into greater detail on. The proponent team has developed a plan for a mix of uses and typologies that are intended to meet the diverse needs of this new community over the long term. And can the panel provide any advice or any suggestions of any elements that might be missing?
Thank you. We're ready for the proponent presentation. You have 20 minutes. I'll signal. It's time to wrap up.
Thanks, Michael. Share the screen. Thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be here to represent the proponent team. I'm Angie Jen Osman from Allies and Morrison Architects as part of the master plan team. I have joined with me Joe Speck and James Willett from Woodbine Entertainment Group. I have Lee McGrath and Josh Fuller from USI Urban Strategies. I have Neil Shaughnessy, my colleague from Allies and Morrison Architects, and Alan Lord from VA Group. Together, we have been thinking about the sites, the wider Woodbine lines for several years now, and have been working with the city staff over the last 6 months in arriving at what we see as a holistic proposal.
Just briefly about the vision that the Woodbine Entertainment Group has. Essentially, the site, as Joanna described, it's bounded by Highway 27, Highway 427, Rexdale Boulevard to the north, and Rail Corridor to the south. It also has the wider reaches, other larger landscapes, which is the Humber Arboretum and the Navajo Creek towards the west. Today we will be discussing the southeastern portion of the site, which is within the secondary plan study. There are also ongoing plans to the northwest as well, and in the southeast that will be in parallel. The idea is that ongoing development all support horse racing operations for its future within the site and across the campus. This is conceived alongside these other respective neighborhoods that are to be connected in the wider Woodbine site area, but also beyond. And so having a variety of mixed uses is important in the coherent plan for all of the site area with horse racing at the center. This is a cultural institution that has had a long history in Toronto and for the site. Working with BA Group and the wider team, we have set forth a number of mobility principles. This was included in the preview deck. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of the bullet points, but that is working in concert with the infrastructure master plan, as well as the environmental assessment, as well as the design for the master plan. And there are a series of in-depth network overlays that we're looking at in terms of pedestrian focused street networks, cycling, transit, to come together as a complete network and a complete community. These parallel processes, as I said, works with the TMP and the EA, and thinking about not just within the secondary plan boundary, but as wider reaches within Woodbine site and beyond. So today we're focusing on this southeastern quadrant. I will describe 3 neighborhoods that form that quadrant and how the street network and the network of parks and open spaces work together to create what we see as a long-term legacy for the site. As Joanna stated, we have been working together on really a charter of 7 principles, thinking about open spaces, the parks and squares, and create a balance between the natural and built elements, and of course grounded in Indigenous principles that we're listening and learning about. We think alongside that, there is a connected network of streets and routes and thoroughfares to actually, foster the urban life that happens in these communities. It is important. A site of this size will be developed over many years. That the blocks are rational, they're the right size, and the streets are the right widths. And looking at a diversity to be resilient across the neighborhoods, it being flexible, it also being complete at every stage to minimize disruption, but also in particular to Woodbine itself, that is a place of its place. That all of the designs and plans that are conceived across the site references back to the cultural history of Woodbine. There have been many race courses across globally that have an element of prestige of being able to actually have whole complete communities around the horse racing operations that we've thought about and studied, and so taking that in as part of thinking behind the master plan. And the 7 ideas are grounded by looking at the network of parks, a boulevard that connects all the communities, thinking about how transit works and it being integrated as to many modes of mobility, having a balanced community, thinking about the local hubs that each neighborhood intact will have its own amenities and community resources, thinking about how we make the best possible edges and greening the edges as interface to industry to the south and to the east, and how these three neighborhoods can be distinct. Just briefly on the site itself, there is a natural topography that we find as site level change from the south and the north. It's higher towards the track, and then there's a lower elevation towards the south. There is, with its proximity to the airport, a noise contour restriction across the site and limiting the height to about 16 stories, and the surrounding industry to the south, of which Grizzle paving has an influence in the available areas that we can designate sensitive uses for residential neighborhoods. As I referred to previously, we observed the Humber Arboretum and Mimico Creek as being significant landscapes in its proximity, and thinking about the green of the racetrack and how a holistic park network, and these are large park spaces we're looking at, can actually help complement and enhance both the biodiversity corridors, but also open it up as an asset to the neighborhoods that will call this their home. We think, having this linear arrangement and widening of parks allow us to reinforce that sense of place with vistas towards the track. Each park will have a different character and is anticipated to be delivered in different phases. The idea is that each of these parks will be within 5 minutes of each of the neighborhoods. These are sizable parks. Each of the areas that have been designated are around 1 hectare or a couple of hectares. So we're looking at about an aggregate of 11 hectares of development for what is a 76 hectare or 190 acres of site. This then sits in the wider 690 acres of the Woodbine lands. We've, working with the city team, looked at a number of good precedents within Toronto and in terms of kind of scale comparisons and how these would work, thinking about the urban structure around the parks. So essentially, not only do we have the park network as a series of these finger parks that actually all gravitate towards the track, but also in terms of the street network, Woodbine, a spine of Woodbine Boulevard that links all the neighborhoods together. Within each of the neighborhood, 3 Park Village, Station Quarter, and East Green, each of them will have their own secondary and tertiary street network, which we will explain later. The idea is to allow and enhance as much connectivity back to the GO station within 5 to 10 minutes walk of each other. We quite like in that original plan, this interspersing of urban density in amongst the expanse of the parks. So, a sequence of kind of enriching urban experiences that go from park to town to park to town. We understand, for the ground levels of most urban fabric, it does need critical mass. It needs intensity for that to be flourishing. And this illustration of Woodbine Boulevard is one attempt of us envisioning that. In contrast, beyond these town centers or the neighborhoods, we get these animated edges to these large parks. We think it's rather important to have homes as close to the enjoyment of the parks as possible, and being able to actually offer that not just once but threefold, 6 edges for those who live here and work here to enjoy. As I touched on, there is a limitation in height. So this is a great opportunity to be able to deliver mid-rise communities that are mixed. We have a limitation of 16 stories, but of course, we're not proposing 16 stories throughout. We are looking at a mix of typologies ranging from low-rise all the way up to about 16 stories. Back to the open space network, the parks work in concert with a number of smaller drain spaces and pocket parks, as well as mid-block connections. And, you know, the idea is that the pops and the more intimate, smaller drain spaces are almost like in terms of offer of available quantum of space. When we look at and envision the variety of activity, not just in general games programming, but also enjoyment as family parks throughout the seasons and throughout the year. We will come back to this slide. There is a set of dimension slides that we can review if the panel wishes to delve into a little bit more detail. But the idea is that each of them will be within 5 minutes walk. And this isn't set of stone, but it's an attempt at looking at and envisioning how these parks would work, how it would work in terms of programming, how it would work with informal play, and thinking about the scale of a tennis court to an American football field and how it actually fits in these parks. We're looking at the park average width of about 150 meters across in depth for the main Southlands Park. And it's not just about how it's programmed above grade, but also how it works below, thinking about stormwater drainage and seeing that ecosystem work throughout, and geothermal being incorporated across the site. And so really thinking about a new way of enjoying these parks, not just driving up and parking against it, but also encouraging being able to walk along the edges. And so we thought, to best optimize the site, we are looking at public footpaths being encumbered by parking for the development plots. I'll go into a little bit more detail about the depth of the ribbon block typology that interfaces the park. Alongside Woodbine Boulevard, in concert with the parks, is looking at these pocket spaces, which could be civic squares that are, have also sustainable foundations, and it's thinking about how that works with the transit network. Thinking about those green connections and integrating that blue-green infrastructure. And that also stems to the smaller, more micro parks, local pocket parks, that in thinking about small children and daycares and nurseries, and how these smaller, more intimate spaces would be more appropriate for the neighborhood, and working with the city staff team, thinking about how we can actually dedicate some space nestled within the neighborhoods for that. And of course, Toronto has a history of very successful parks that actually work really well within the urban context. With that, the linking of those market parks to the larger park are mid-block connections, intimate connections between the urban blocks, but also a significant one, which is the Station Largo, that connects between the Woodbine Boulevard to the station itself. So this is an illustration of that more intimate mid-block connection that encourages cycling and pedestrian walkability across those neighborhoods. For the more civic piece, the Station Largo is really trying to anchor two pieces of civic built form, having civic use at the Woodbine Boulevard as one goes from the station towards Woodbine Boulevard. And this is an illustration of what it could look like, encouraging the use of transit and walkability. Of course, this is bolstered by thinking about the hierarchy of streets. Not only do we have Woodbine Boulevard, but working with Alan and the team, thinking about local streets, this Park Drive towards the north, and service streets, station streets towards the south, and all being connected together with a loop road, which formed what we call a petal for one of the urban structure of these neighborhoods. There are more intimate pedestrian lanes that knit between these kind of three spines across the neighborhood. And so in thinking about right sizing the width of those streets, thinking about the hierarchy of Woodbine Boulevard being the widest at 36 meters, the transit mall at something like 23, and local streets to down to 20. And in right sizing the streets, we're also right sizing the blocks, and they both work in concert and thinking about the activation and what are fronts, what are backs to enable it to be as functional and workable as possible. Across the three neighborhoods, we're looking at 5 character areas. The areas around the privilege of the park are ribbon blocks, and I'll talk through the typology for that. Where it is in the interface to Highway 27 at the eastern edge, we have edge blocks, which take on a different block configuration. And then within the middle of the neighborhoods, we have central blocks, which are larger, more generous, has a little bit more room in order to account for different typologies and different configuration. Along the southern edge, we have planned for non-residential use or a flexible mixed use in some instances to really encourage that transition between what is the station through the residential neighborhoods and buffer against some of the environmental constraints, particularly towards the southeastern sites. All of this plan sets forth different block typologies, which we looked at in detail. And for each of the blocks, we've anticipated what working with others, ground floor, a typical floor, looking at a mix of typologies, mid-block connections in between, testing the environmental qualities between these blocks. I'm pleased to report that we've tested the park spaces, and all of the parks achieve in excess of 5 hours of access to 50% of parks and solar access for all large park spaces. And it's performing really well. And predominantly is because this is a mid-rise community. It doesn't have the kind of shadowing impacts that one would typically associate with urban, more denser urban environments. Towards the edge blocks, we're looking at a 50-meter deep block. Also being able to anticipate how we use landscaping to buffer to some of the noise and perhaps the environmental qualities of Highway 27 towards its eastern edge, and also studying how these blocks can be serviced, how we can plan for good quality apartments around grade. The ribbon blocks are more narrow. They're 40 meters, around 30 meters in terms of built form. Again, we've studied this with the help of others, looking at an advice, looking at how it is serviced, how we can lay out plausible parking that is necessary for some accessibility needs to ensure that these apartments are the best quality that they could be.
So we can pause you there and say, I know that you've got a few more slides to go.
Okay.
We're at 20 minutes, but we've got a little bit of buffer. So you've got about 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Michael. And so we've looked at many precedents across Toronto, Maple House we've been familiar with, also to understand that actually works in what we've designed for the site, looking at 1 Adriatic by Superpool, thinking about how in tight urban sites that could still function with one point of access on one street, and being able to provide good quality residential environments to street frontages for the neighborhoods. This works in concert not just for the residential buildings themselves, but also alongside with civic buildings and accounts for the different types of workspaces and office buildings, really setting the tone of a clear street hierarchy across the site. The land use plan, is really informed by the thinking about these typologies across the site and thinking about concentrating retail and activation along Woodbine Boulevard and where matters most across to the station, where we have the greatest levels of animation. Woodbine Social itself is we see as a very exciting campus of incubator spaces for incubator enterprises to allow for that very quick immediate programming around the station to give it that sense of interest to provide the amenities for all those arriving at the station. And this is an illustration of how it all comes together, a balance of, again, taking the walkable routes all the way through towards the station. And we've studied a number of precedents that are well loved, both here in Toronto and Vancouver, Copenhagen, and even the one we worked with before in London. All of this is, has fundamental principles in terms of phasing. It isn't a small community. We are looking at 20,000 homes within the site area. We're dedicating 54% of the site area to open space, integrating 16 million square feet of residential, about 2 million of employment space with a host of civic and community spaces for about 35,000 residents and 10,000 jobs. We've a number of collaborative city workshops. We are evolving the plan and still looking at emerging refinements, increasing areas of parkland, but without losing the urban structure of what we're proposing here, thinking about how stormwater drainage works across. We have an overall park location size and configuration generally agreed with the city team, thinking about interest of integrating bioswales and dry ponds across the site, thinking about how hops work and working alongside with the mobility plan. And here we have Woodbine, and hopefully in time to come, it is a complete community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Panel, we have an opportunity now to ask the city and the proponent questions of clarification. So I'm going to look for hands here and on screen. I see Paul, Jim, Joe, and Heather. Paul? Oh, and Judy.
And Ralph.
And Ralph.
Hi, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Indeed.
I'm just wondering, early on in one of the slides talking about parks, you included a comparison or precedent of some of the parks in Toronto. And I'm wondering if we could just have a quick look at that, because I don't believe it was in the package.
No, I apologize. We hadn't provided it at the time. I'll go back. So the parks we had looked at is Aiken Park and Sherbourne Common. And in all of...
Oh, yeah, there. Great.
And the examples that we've looked at, often these parks have two street access, and the other sides have a form up against it.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Jim?
You did sneak in a few slides we hadn't seen before. My question is about civic spaces. I saw a slide that had scale dots, but there was nothing that I could see that said our civic spaces are going to happen in these places. Do you have that thought process down yet, or can you show me?
I can show you the plan, but the short answer is no. The idea is that the civic spaces would work off the Woodbine Boulevard. There is one key space that we see as a kids' civic space, which is the Station Largo that connects the station to...
Yeah, there is a civic space there. But what was that? We don't know.
We don't know. So we're working with the city team to come up with ideas of how we program that.
And one other question. the GO station is on your slide, a proposed GO station, and there's LRTs on 27. How much around those are realistic?
And for the GO station, there's already spades in the ground, as I hear. So it's being, in terms of the LRT, how will be best to answer that?
Yeah, the line on map 4 of the official plan right now is unfunded and unstudied, but it could count.
I'll be dead before that one.
Well, no, but it is a long range, but it's on our work to deal with the interface and the plan for the future.
So
GO
those,
station is real.
so those are pretty accurate then. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Next, Joe.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. One, the teams made reference to civic uses or community uses, perhaps to use another term, within the overall plan, but without naming them more specifically. So I am curious about, for example, in a community of this scale, where are school sites identified? Has that been given some thought, including the open space typically associated with schools? So that's, and then what are some of the other potential civic uses that you're imagining, if I could ask that question? My second question is, if I may, the overall plan is very specific, dare I say, idiosyncratic, in the sense that the illustrations or the visualizations do show a great variety of formal change and scale. And so appreciating the height, overall height limitations and the density objectives, how is it that from a planning perspective, you are imagining informing the built form controls that actually deliver this kind of what I'll call idiosyncratic kind of approach to form? How do you actually deliver on that? Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Maybe I'll begin with when it comes to the various community services. So far the plans that were prepared by the Woodbine Group show the potential locations for community and civic uses. The city is currently undergoing a needs assessment to determine the various types of community services that would be needed in order to achieve a complete community. And in terms of potential co-location of a school with a park, perhaps Nathan, would you like to address?
Yeah, that's something that we haven't entirely landed on for this area. With TDSB, I've had conversations about this area and what their needs are going to be. And they typically look for a more urban form of school. We're having conversations about process more generally with Parks and Rec and TLC to understand what it looks like to have lands adjacent to parkland and what kind of programming synthesize or opportunities might allow some synthesis between the two uses.
Similar to community learning. Joe, does that answer your questions?
No, well, it starts to answer. I gather there is no sort of idea of where the schools are yet, or even if there will be some, given the isolation of this community overall. That's a critical issue. But this issue of how do you actually deliver on the idiosyncratic form, I'd appreciate an answer to that. Thank you.
So on that, the secondary plan will include policies to ensure that there is a diverse built form typology. One of the objectives that the city has is to ensure that we do not have just uniform typology across the site. The secondary plan is intended to work closely with urban design guidelines that will be developed as part of this overall process. So the urban design guidelines will provide greater detail on the individual blocks and the type of typologies that could occur within those individual blocks.
Yeah. So I understand all that, but diplomatically, if I may, that's not really an answer. What you mean? That's just the norm of how you do urban design guidelines. But urban design guidelines typically are describing communities that aren't quite as idiosyncratic and highly specific as you're suggesting. So that's what I'm asking: is how do you actually deliver over decades a community that you're imagining to be highly idiosyncratic? In other words, I'm not familiar with urban design guidelines and secondary plans that deliver that kind of specificity and idiosyncratic quality. Maybe you can cite precedents that you're aware of or specific ideas you have about how you actually deliver this.
So just to add, the blocks are essentially very straightforward. It's the spaces between them that are complex, have that idiosyncratic shaping that's being referred to. There's been quite a number of tests in making sure that it actually provides viable development blocks to allow for the variation of height and typologies across the site. The position of Woodbine Boulevard was very carefully thought of being in the mid distance within each of the neighborhoods to allow one to be able to walk to the central spine of amenities within 5 minutes in every direction. And so the idiosyncratic nature is a result of the also constraint and plan configuration of the site itself.
Joe, I'm going to add to your question, which is that I think at the Etobicoke Civic Center lands, we saw a similar aspirational form giving, and also the Christie Cookie site, we saw a similar one. So the city would have begun, at the very least, thinking about how to deliver on those illustrations of urban design aspiration. Maybe that's a question for a different meeting, because it's a very big question, and I think as a panel, we're very interested.
Ralph is disagreeing.
If I may add one more thing. One of the things we've been discussing, I'm Lee McGrath from Urban Strategies, one of the we've been discussing with city colleagues is about the how to work on a policy document, how to reflect the uniqueness of the direction of the concept, and focus on that in terms of what the secondary plan actually says. Not to repeat the parent policies that we know secondary plans often do, but really focus on what's distinct. So I think as we're thinking about the role, and I appreciate what's already been said about, just repeating what these policy documents do, but we will be thinking really intentionally about what is this design intended to achieve, and how do we articulate that within policy to capture that intent to the extent that an official plan document can do that. And then as Joanne has already said, we have layers that will also be expressing the intent of the design, whether that's in the zoning layer, and then following the urban design guidelines, which I think are intended again to capture the intent of the design spirit. So using the tools we have available to us, which we are some limitations to what they are, we want to work within them to express that uniqueness to the best of our ability.
Thank you. I'm going to suggest that, Joe, I think we're going to ask city planning to give us an insight into the progress on other projects, maybe above and beyond this particular one today. That's okay. Next is Heather.
Okay, thank you. I have 4 questions. The first one is about the way that the landscape is rendered. I think you said that the 3 parks have very different characteristics, but they're rendered with a kind of degree of sameness, like mounded forms within a kind of paved substrate. So I'm just wondering if that's a placeholder, or within that kind of character, will there be differences?
It's a placeholder at the moment.
Yeah.
It's only, we're very early days in part of the design process, so
Yeah.
working with time, they will.
Yeah. Okay. And the placement of the Woodbine social area, is that intended to be at the edge because of noise, or is it a destination associated that could benefit from the GO station. I'm just wondering if you could give a couple of sentences on why it's in the corner there.
It's a bit of both.
Yes.
So it's in proximity to the station, but largely there is also an environmental concern industry in the southeastern corner that has a 3-meter curtilage that doesn't allow for sensitive uses. So it isn't at the moment possible to have residential environments right up against the GO station. We also mindful of essentially curating activity so that there is the amenities that's available for those coming and going to the station as well. So we thought it would be a suitable point of animation for the fun and difference as well.
What is it called here? The park meadow on the west side. I asked this question in the pre-session actually with the city. I'll just say, just because it's at the edge, it's one-sided largely, except for right here where you're adding some uses. Just wondering, I'm understanding that this is perhaps a park that will be feasible or interim, but I'm assuming there's fences probably around some of these uses right now, or?
At the moment, it's the horse operation stables at the moment. So there is a fence for security, there is a fence. In the fullness of time, because Woodbine will be announcing other plans for the southwest lands, we will see some more wholesome integration and definition to the park edge. You will see there is a variety of heights throughout the neighborhoods. The understanding is we want to be able to actually have more homes. So the taller buildings actually form the edges and contain the edges of the park. And then within the neighborhoods themselves, the lower rise built typologies have been allocated. That's intentional. It's to actually contain the park space to give it that sense of, I guess, definition.
Okay. And then I'm just going to combine 2 questions. In the street sections that you've shown, I didn't see any parking on the streets. And then I just note that the typology, the kind of sample blocks that you showed, I think you've changed the page numbers on us all now, but on pages 40, 41 and 42, you're building out the full block. And I know there's more labels on it now, but before in our package, it was noted as kind of circulation. Like these are deep blocks with a lot of back of house that are 1.5 to 2 stories tall in a lot of places with amenity on top, it would seem. So it's a different typology than we're used to seeing in the city with amenity spaces, on podium roofs that are much higher. So I'm just wondering if you could speak about that typology a little bit more. I know you did in the presentation, but so the idea of overlook, from only a 4.5 above and also the very deep ground plane that you're taking over this building in all places.
So in some of the central blocks are deeper. They're deeper to allow for mid-block connections and a mix of typologies of townhouses, duplexes, as well as taller buildings, taller rises. The areas, the ribbon block and the park edge, the ribbon block, there's 2 different types. These are more mansion block. We think that because this is a much more civic park compared to Park Meadows. Park Meadows takes on a much more of a C shape, so they're deeper to allow for some of those amenities. And we think in our kind of line and also observations throughout, traveling, looking at other cities, having amenity for the residents in close proximity to the parkland actually extends that parkscape in terms of enjoyment of views, cross views, and light and access to the apartments themselves.
I can't help it. I need to just this little carbuncle thing here. That's not on some of the plans. What is that?
So
I apologize too.
Anticipated as a.
Can you describe that? Look where that is.
Yeah, thank you.
while we're waiting,
It's a pavilion, not a car park. but-
Okay, yeah, I know, I didn't mean that as a bad term, that's just what came to me, yeah.
So Ralph, it's this one here. Can you see my arrow?
Yes. Oh, yes. The little, yeah.
Little pavilion there in the
Thank
middle
you.
part.
Yeah,
I mean, it's illustrative at the moment, but working with the city team, the anticipation is maybe perhaps because of its prime location and adjacent to the track, it could be a, some kind of observation pavilion of some sort.
okay,
But that's to be discussed with the parks team.
thanks, sorry, Michael.
it's okay, panel, I need to let you know that we had a little less time than we've used for questions of clarification. Obviously, they're important. If you're okay, we will reduce the panel discussion, and I'm trying not to have it reduced to the point where we have less than 3 minutes per person. We've got 8 panel members today. So if that's okay, then we'll continue with Juhi, Ralph, and Dima. Juhi?
I'll ask just one of my questions. Maybe can you talk about the programming for the Woodbine Social? What is exactly there? It seems like it's still, I understand that there are residential cannot go in there, but I don't think it's commercial either. Is it mainly retail and just business incubators?
We don't quite know yet, but it's anticipated that it could be a mix of employment, workspaces, for, startup, companies, makers, but also could be retail, breweries, depending on the needs. But it's not residential.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Juhi. Ralph?
Okay, I've got a few questions. I'm going to try to answer. They're pretty essential, I think. But first, at a high level, can you describe in Toronto, there are developers, there are builders, and then there are a few pure developer builders. Can you describe your client and what they are and what they're intending to, how to roll out this master plan to the final execution? Are they intending on staying in building by building, block by block to build it themselves, or joint venture, or are they looking to also sell some of these to individual builders or builder developers?
Hi, Ralph. So Woodbine, as Angie mentioned, I'll call it a lowercase nonprofit because it operates as a nonprofit in the sense that all of the revenue from the program you're seeing before you goes back to the Ontario horse racing community, and that gets distributed to them at Woodbine and across the province of Ontario to support. So in terms of developer, like we are not a developer, like a capital D developer. We're working on behalf of a horse jockey association to keep that sport thriving in Ontario, not just at the site. So naturally, it would be like the short answer is phase by phase. We would work with builders and developers. We call ourselves a master developer, kind of lowercase m master developer, putting this all together. But we're in control of the phasing, the blocks, and then we would bring in execution partners like Rydell, Fran, like all the regular people that know how to build. So that like, we don't have aspirations to become a construction company, but we are taking the role of kind of master developer. And it depends on a per block basis. So a lot of what we're trying to do, given the market and our ambition, is obviously rental. So we would partner with those types of organizations.
Great. Okay, so just quickly going through Woodbine Social. I'm just going to ask a little more particular question. Can you please describe what a meanwhile use is? And then could you kind of mention its longevity tenure? Is it meanwhile meaning temporal uses that will get redeveloped over time, or is this a permanent amenity to the site?
Straightforward answer, Ralph, we don't know, because there is the environmental constraint towards the southeast. At the moment, we thought no one is building office buildings. To plan for the office buildings would include proximity because we can't have residential sensitive uses. We do think, there is a need with the station to provide amenities, to provide activation for the rest of the neighborhood. And so it was an opportunity to allow for Woodbine Social to be able to provide those amenities in absence of actually allowable sensitive uses. So in the fullness of time, one would hope once the environmental constraints have been removed, we could look at other uses within that area.
Okay. So yeah, I'm a glass half full person, and in this case, I'm way more than half full on this one. So take this as friendly kind of commentary and questions. Can you describe what nodes are? Like you've shown nodes, and what is the definition of a node to you, and both in terms of physical and programmatic?
Yeah, okay. So we designated civic and local nodes, and we see built form and open space working in concert together to define those. They are, I guess, micro spaces to allow for, aspects of community to come together. So if we have a nursery, we would like to see, some aspect of a micro park, albeit it might be a POPs because some areas will need to be encumbered underneath. But they come in concert to actually enhance the street, the internal local street network. They're points of kind of enlargement to allow for community gatherings.
Okay, just got a couple more questions. How much retail? And then
Ralph, just a second. We're coming close to time.
There's two more questions, and then it's vital actually. This question is like really important, I think, to understand. You show retail. I'm looking at the conceptual ground floor uses. There's generally a kind of typical size and depth across 90%, and then there is one very large red block. Can you describe the amount of retail, how much retail there is? You have a stat sheet, but no idea about how much retail. A little bit about what that retail is that is so exceptional.
I don't have the exact number for the quantum of retail, but to answer, but we can provide it as a follow-up. In terms of the depth of retail, we're looking at kind of along Woodbine Boulevard, a one-sided frontage to allow for a suitable kind of 6-8 meter. Ralph, you will know more than me in terms of optimum depth for activation for retail. The large kind of pinky block that you see in the southern extent of the neighborhood, Park Village, is anticipating a very large food store of some sort or retailer to serve the needs of that community.
And last question, I apologize, I'm kind of taking too much time, but I know that you mentioned there's flexibility in the plan, which is very admirable. Given the size of this plan, and maybe your client can help answer this, in order to deliver flexibility, infrastructure has to be placed. And so I'm assuming that this is phased with phased infrastructure. Can you just give me, is there a high level picture of how the phasing strategy is going to work? Which phase goes, at least at this moment in time, given the servicing costs?
At this moment in time, we don't know. That is the honest answer. We have some ideas, but it's just too early.
But the idea is that as every phase gets built, or at least neighborhood gets built, a park gets built.
Yes, that is the idea. I mean, we essentially, infrastructure is investment. We don't want, the roots of those infrastructure to change and to be dug up. We were working with the team and seeing how that phasing can be sequenced.
And again, just to not be pedantic or specific, if East Green gets built first, that east-west finger gets built with East Green and not with Station Quarter.
Yes, that is correct. I think if anything, the secondary plan will include policy related to phasing and the expectations of what needs to be delivered with each phase. And so that will be the commensurate amount of park, the appropriate elements of the, infrastructure plan, the transportation master plan.
Thanks, Ralph. I'm sure by virtue of all the questions, we will be able to deliver commentary at 3 minutes per individual, because that's what we're getting now. Dima, you've got a bit of time for your questions. Dima?
I apologize. I lowered my hand but did not unmute myself. Ralph had asked my phasing question. Maybe related to that is there's a mid-block connections that are indicated, but it's not clear to me how in the block diagrams or in the massing models, whether the mid-block connections and the like servicing for all the buildings, how they relate. Like, are the mid-block connections also going to be servicing for buildings, or are they purely pedestrian?
At the moment, as illustrated, they're purely pedestrian because we've tested the blocks and the blocks have enough street frontage for access of servicing. Now, there is a hierarchy in terms of those street frontages. The ones that are the main Woodbine Boulevard tend to be primary, and those are fronts, and we would, within the guidelines, discourage servicing from those main arterial routes.
And maybe one last question. In terms of sunlighting, you spoke about sunlighting on parks, but was there a study done to understand like sunlighting on streets?
Yes, that is ongoing. So we are testing that as we speak.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dima. Thank you, panel members. So remembering the questions, we'll be back quite a while in our conversation. We were asking about missing guiding principles, things that we could add, comments on park structure to observe and improve the park structure. And are there elements still not yet described that might be needed to improve the overall plan that's being proposed? That's my summary of what the questions were. I'm going to begin in this order. Gordon, Joe, Heather, Jim, Juhi, Dima, and then Paul, and then Ralph. So starting with you, Gordon, then Joe, then Heather.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I wanted to thank the presentation team and the city team for the presentations of what could be a fascinating next chapter for the city of Toronto. I think that there are some really fascinating ideas here, and my comments are going to be based around perhaps not asking some questions, but posing things for you to think about as you move forward into the next stage. I think that when I look at the secondary plan, and I can appreciate the size of the overall site, which includes Woodbine Racetrack and everything else, I'm trying to imagine how this very unique way of looking at open space and urban neighborhoods, which I'll come back to in a second, how you can get that to infiltrate its way through the rest of the site. And I think that's going to be particularly important because these park tendrils suggest that you're going someplace, that there's a path that you can follow to go elsewhere within the site and into the broader neighborhood. So my comment on that is not only the permeability and connectivity within the overall Woodbine site, because I think it could be very, very beneficial. And I know you have a preliminary diagram that you showed earlier, but then also beyond the boundaries of this particular site, so that it takes all these good things that are being shown and actually send those tendrils down into the other parts of the city that are adjacent. And I think that's really important. So when I look at each edge of the secondary plan site, I have question marks at every single edge in terms of how that will happen. I think that still staying at the site level, what happens along that southern east-west strip where the where the GO station is, I think it's going to be very important to try to get, even if it's a placeholder, a handle on that, because again, if that isn't done right, then you may find that you've got this idea that is within the rest of the secondary plan that is captured and can't go anyplace else. So I just wanted to put that into your thoughts as well. I think I can see it in the wording and the intent about this whole notion of green. And I'm actually on my other laptop looking at a space very similar to what you're trying to do, which is in Copenhagen. And I think the thing that about it that is different from what you're showing, there may be something to be learned. And I'll pick up on the ribbon buildings for a second. That and your desire to make connections into each of these neighborhoods. And the idea that if you go through a series of views in the neighborhoods, that when you get towards the ribbon building, that there's the ability, if you choose, to be able to go through that ribbon building and reach into the park. I think the ribbon buildings, as they are right now, shown in the diagram, may form a wall. And I think that if you want to really get it to work the way you're talking about it, I think there needs to be as much permeability as well as there can be. It doesn't take away from the built form and the framing edge, but it enhances the pedestrian connections. And then I would love to see a diagram, and again, I hear the words of how the green of the parks, the tendrils move through into parkettes, urban forests, all those things that I think you are talking about, but I haven't seen a diagram that shows that yet. And I believe it's there, it's just simply hidden. And in case you're wondering what park I'm looking at right now, I think it's called the Havenstad neighborhood. And the thing that's about it is so successful is that it is permeable. It's framed and it's permeable, and you can just get all the small spaces. I've spent days and weeks there, and it works really well. And I think there's something to be learned from that. The next thing I'm going to move on to is maybe more information about some of the existing uses that are nearby, in particular the Woodbine Works. I won't ask that question now, but it seems as if you can look beyond the boundaries of the secondary plan and imagine what the Woodbine Works could contribute if it's similar to Woodbine's social, and not let the boundaries sort of stop you as being the edge of your universe, that you really have to think about beyond that. And I think you're fully capable of doing that. Built form character, I just want to talk about this and then I'm finished. It's interesting as we redevelop existing sites, is picking up on the character of what is there or what used to be there and what will become in the future. And sometimes if you have, say, an industrial neighborhood from the turn of the century, not the turn of the 20th to the 21st, but way back another 100 years, there is a connection. And it's interesting when you have horse racing and you have stables, the opportunity and the complexity of trying to get those things working with buildings that may be 14 stories high. I see some of it being started in some of the diagrams. I remember there was one diagram that shows buildings and it has the finer grain picking up a building type from, say, the stables on top of the building. I would love to see more of, and I think you're showing it, starting to show it, that the big moves of a residential neighborhood and the size of those buildings, there's always that counterbalance of the fine grain that is animated that you show very, very well in your drawings, and that becomes successful, and it's not something that can only be successful in a diagram that's colorful, that you get it to actually be something that is going to add a very unique character to this area. I think those are my main comments for now. And again, thank you very much for what is a fascinating potential development.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm just going to reflect on a moment. You're usually extremely concise, and that was 5 minutes. And if we take that and multiply it over the 8, I'm going to ask the room and the city whether we're comfortable extending beyond our time, because I have a hunch we're going to get there. Are we comfortable? Yes. Okay. Yes?
Yes, please.
You stop at Ralph or Ralph.
My apologies.
Okay, so if we're comfortable, then we'll continue, but please, if you can, let's try for 3 minutes per person, self-managed. And then next is Joe.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for a very informative and stimulating presentation thus far. It's a very challenging existing context. Just want to acknowledge that. Really a challenging set of circumstances. And I think what the city team together with the development team have brought forward is, broadly speaking, a beautiful kind of vision that I find immediately appealing. I find the visualizations accessible, which is important, but I want to come back and talk about those. I think you've identified some very strong principles. I'm going to come back to one of them specifically. And notwithstanding what I would call an unusual approach to open space, I think I like it. And by that, I mean the idea that it's distributed but continuous. It tries to do both. And so that's I think an interesting idea. I think I have some very specific feedback. One project, though, I'm just going to mention for some context that I would recommend both the city team and the development team look at really closely, where I think there's lots of resonance, lots of lessons learned, and might be quite relevant here, is another major development in the city, the West Donlands. 80 acres, initially 6,000 units, 1 million square feet of open space, a 20-acre central park, and mostly a mid-rise approach to form, but in that case, some specific towers. Lots of also very isolated site. There are many topics that resonate for me. Look at the cross section between Front Street and Mill Street together with the side streets. Your approach to how taller buildings front a larger street, another street on the other end of the block is a slightly smaller street, and then local streets. There's a lot of perhaps lessons about how that condition is managed in the West Donlands and perhaps can be improved upon. With respect to built form character, one thing, notwithstanding my appreciation of your visualizations, they are simply that. They're kind of meant to help everyone kind of understand the scale of the place, but they do not represent its final character. I think if you look at the West Donlands, for example, as an example, the visualizations of the character of that place, it's fascinating to see how they evolved over time. And my point there is, when you're developing a secondary plan and initial concepts, you have to come up with sort of an ideas of form that will help inform the kind of policy that will evolve. But in the 2 decades or whatever of this development, there is no way we can precisely predict how various architects and developers will approach specific sites. Hence, to me, one of the most critical aspects of this project, which I appreciate is yet to come, notwithstanding many questions about wanting to get into detail that you're at an earlier stage, is how you actually deliver the, I use the word idiosyncratic in my questions, but what I would call it is a more specific, more diverse, more less monochromatic, less uniform, more interesting neighborhood. Fundamentally, that's what you're trying to create. And but my point is that the means by which you define the policy that's going to result in the place you're asking for, not an easy task. So this next thing you're about to take on, I think is hugely challenging. But I just want to provide my enthusiasm for where you're going. A couple of very specific points. I appreciate the aspiration for including townhouses. I remember in the West Donlands exercise, we had townhouses in there to begin with. They didn't last long when the business plan kind of got real. So there's a kind of aspect to what you're showing where some components of it, I'm wondering, well, how are you going to actually make that work financially? And if that's working financially, what are the implications to the rest of it? So that involves the southeast corner sites, the non-residential ones. I'm kind of dubious about those right now, as well as the lower scale residential sites. I really do think that things like schools are essential to communities and can't be an afterthought. So that's a critical thing. I think the shadow studies and solar access, which I gather you're working on, are going to be critical. But I'm very interested in how this is going to evolve, and I really appreciate the energy and creativity thus far. One final comment on the principles. Principle 7, I think, really is lame, candidly. A place of its place. I don't know what that means. I'm not sure that what you've generated reminds me of the Woodbine neighborhood or the Woodbine racetrack at all. And I'm not sure, candidly, it needs to. But that would be the one principle where I think you need to articulate the approach to form that you've got in mind. This idea of a kind of modern village. That's the way I would describe it, where it looks like it kind of got naturally evolved, except you're gonna make it very consciously. So I think that would be my recommendation. Work on that principle a bit more, so that the idea of the form of the place is embedded in its kind of DNA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Heather's next.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much for the presentation. I have a lot of appreciation for the package. It's so rare to actually have someone bring in a model. So for those of you who aren't in the room, you're missing out. I think that the ideas and the charter of guiding principles are very good. And I especially appreciate the one that was the completeness at every phase or stage. So aiming for that, I think, is great. With respect to the parks, I agree with Gordon about connectivity at the ends, or how these tendrils actually finish. I wouldn't describe the parks at the edges of the three neighborhoods, because I think that's the way I saw them at the beginning, and you have a diagram like that. But really, as over the fullness of time, these are feasible green spaces that won't really be at the edges. They'll be quite central. So just adding that for commentary. I asked about the sameness of the landscape because I actually think it's maybe not a bad thing to really distinguish this area as a place. And I really appreciate the edges of each of those green spaces being walkable and against buildings. So I think that's a very unique quality. The loop boulevard, Woodbine Boulevard, I'm a bit skeptical about the continuous nature of it outside of this development. So this is a comment for the room that anything that people can do to kind of keep that very strong boulevard as a figure within this master plan, I think is great. I am a little bit skeptical about the very deep lower floor plates on a number of the blocks. And while I think it's great to maybe contain as much loading, servicing, circulation as possible, I do think it's taking up a lot of the ground plane. And some of the precedents that you've shown, like the Greenwich example, sort of illustrate that the spaces between buildings can also be really great spaces and provide a bit more variation and less of a wall that I think might be happening in some of these areas. There are a couple of community centers in the Park Village that are not adjacent to any kind of open space, so wondering if you might give that a bit of a rethink. And then I think there are some very strong defining characteristics that we didn't talk about all of them, but no parking on the roads and having swales on every road. The rooftop amenity being sort of close to the ground and it being able to form sort of part of that public realm in a way, I think is something that's quite unique. The landscape and the landscape treatment. So I think if those are moves that are able to sort of brand this community, maybe you could go a bit deeper with some of those ideas. And then lastly, I think some of the emerging refinements are really essential, especially the micro parks, because I do think you need a different scale of green space that could be interspersed. And then we didn't talk at all about the dry ponds, but I find that idea really intriguing as well. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Heather. Next three are Jim, Juhi, and Dina, starting with you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you for presentation. You know what? I thought the graphics were kind of retro. I like that. They look really cool. I guess the first thing is how isolated this property is. It is defined by the highways on either side, defined by, quote, the entertainment district that doesn't seem it'll ever be integrated because it's track and casino, and then the go. So, and then you add employment lands. This space is going to be all defined by whatever you do there. And it's going to be really important to bring, and that's why I'd like to see the civic stuff and how you start to give this place a sense of place. Have I arrived? Am I here now? And where do these roads go? So the first thing is the scale. For myself, those guys have been using Copenhagen. I'm using Collingwood. The population you're bringing here is a little bigger than Collingwood. The length of the Woodbine Street is about Ontario Street in Collingwood. So it has some similarities. So if you think the population of Collingwood to be built around this kind of park system and stuff, it kind of works. You're a little under. Urban Strategies likes to use a per meter squared of we know you've heard me do this before.
Keep going.
You're about 2.75 meters squared per person, which is a little lower than
Standards have been updated.
yeah. Yeah, well, it used to be 3.25 or 3.5. So although when you say, 11 hectares of open space, you go, not so much when it's 30,000, 35,000 people.
I mean, that's just parkland. There's an equivalent amount of tops as well.
And then that brings it to a discussion. What is parkland? But you need those the importance of largos and urban spaces. So the green swards seem to, although they surround the lands, and I like this idea, they further, I think, are further isolating the neighborhood you're creating. Because now it's like the neighborhood on the east has a hydro field before you get to the neighborhood on the west. And although it's not a hydro field, because we don't know what it's going to be, I'm just saying that's space it is. So it has a disconnecting sense. Well, it does have the ability to connect, and that'll be based on what happens. The green swards as well, and you started to talk on the, if you can bring sustainability and that argument, and I know that's still coming, if you can bring that to the green spaces, then I think if I'm thinking Mimico Creek and I'm thinking it's a north to south slope, can we make a, not quite a ravine, but can you have a ravine? There should be, and your graphics show all these different playing fields. Not every green space has to be active. I think you need to have, I want to see a forest. I don't want to see a soccer field, maybe 2 soccer fields. How many soccer fields does Collingwood have? 2, maybe, you know. So you sort of go out and figure that out, but the green should be really green, and it could also be the introduction. Like, I think if you're driving in from 427 or 27, how do you know you've arrived? That's where your architectural pieces, your little pieces at the corner where the LRT on 27 is, and whatever the architecture, that should be, I've arrived at this neighborhood. And same, even if there was a bridge at the western edge, you know, that has a dry creek under it. I think that would, so I cross this bridge, you know, there's a threshold. So I think those would be, give a little more sense of arrival to this whole thing. And the southern edge, I would just default to Gord's argument. And the last thing is, please build your parks first. Don't just use your parks for storage of topsoil. Don't you dare. Build the parks, and your neighbor, like, and I'm talking now, 10 years in advance, so the trees are growing. So if once you get that idea and you want to build a forest, start it right away. Those are my comments. Thank you. Good presentation.
Thanks very much, Jim. Next, we have Juhi.
Thank you. I think it's surprising that sustainability is not identified as a core principle driving this project. I know the strong thinking around green space and active connections, but for a community that will likely be built out through around 2050 and beyond, the master plan would benefit from clearly identifying the risks that it is intended to address, but how it will also support city's goal to be net zero by 2040. That includes climate impacts, infrastructure capacity, long-term resilience, in addition to all these connections that you have also established. So for example, when I looked at it, I wasn't really clear, are the dry ponds located because there's a stormwater management need for the community where they're located? Or will we need a district energy system, which also has very specific space needs as any other programming within that you have allocated here? So that's sort of more my sustainability hat. The 7 principle set a very ambitious vision, and I thought it was a really strong starting point. Currently, few of them remain largely open-ended and kind of open to interpretation. I can see this has started to be pushed further and tested. I think when I saw on page 43, there were clear definitions that were starting to emerge in the phasing principles for the development, which is sort of helpful to see the direction of the travel that you're going. But as we all know, the master plan unfold over very long time horizons, will move across multiple phases, teams, ownership, developer cycles. And I think the principles can remain flexible, but they should be testable. So, and function almost as a sort of a shared accountability tool. So that it's really clear enough that anybody that comes and goes through the entire development pipeline, anybody can say, we're no longer meeting principle number 4. And I think that can be done by pairing very small, clear outcomes or red flag tests to ensure that the original vision that you have created here will guide the future phases as decision makers come and go. And what happens if the 2 principles clash with each other? Which one will win? Do we know? Again, so that makes it very easier if the city and everybody, again, I think this project will go beyond all of us, than making sure that the vision that we have set today is still upheld. So for example, principle 2 speaks to connecting and creating streets that function as both thoroughfares, and destinations. So success of this principle could be measured along walking, cycling, or transit access, not only within the site, but also with the surrounding neighborhood. A potential outcome test could be, has the plan delivered continuous barrier-free pedestrian and cycling routes in the early phases? At the moment, when you look at the diagram, for example, the cycling appears to be accommodated everywhere, which sort of raises an important question of, should cycling be prioritized along certain corridor, or will the pedestrian be prioritized among others? And these modes move at a different speed, and they serve at different destinations. And clarifying these intended outcomes, I think, will make it much easier for you to prioritize how these streets will sort of function and support each other. Finally, I think just on the programming, I love how the South Secondary Plan have tried very hard to make this a complete community. There's a clear effort that tried to push all the boundaries, and I echo the comments made by Gordon and other panel members on connecting the larger fabric beyond this boundary. I also really enjoy how this package almost tried to say, I don't care, we will succeed as a community regardless of the surrounding shortfalls. And I cheer this effort, and I really want these different nodes we are trying to create to succeed. So in that context, I want to raise a note of caution about how the retail is planned for this location, and also what Dima has raised already. So for this part of the city, the retail trends are very different. The area is evolving towards destination-based, service-oriented, and transit-anchored retail, and not traditional street retail. In this context, I think retail is more likely to succeed when it's clustered around destination and public spaces rather than delivered as a continuous streets frontage. I love streets retail, but I think we're seeing it work well only in certain parts of our city. And even on the streets where they're supposed to thrive, we're really seeing more and more increase of empty storefronts now. And if street vibrancy is really important part of this objective and the vision that you have set, making sure that they're positioned in relation to the nodes or the public space or the green spaces, I think are very critical. And not just whether it lines up with the street itself. For example, so that started to sort of question whether should all the retail be located where the Woodbine Social is? Do you want to make that a destination, make sure that it's all concentrated there so that the community is also succeeding on its own? Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Next is Dima.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's given a lot of thought, and this area does provide an incredible opportunity. It's rethinking a whole area, in fact, creating an area from scratch. And when we do that, as we sit in the panel, there's a lot of issues that come up with development in the city and neighborhoods in the city, and we think of some of the challenges we have to our existing streetscapes. And here's an opportunity to kind of think of those challenges right from the get-go and try to address them. So some major questions or thoughts I would have is this idea of, daylight and sunlight on streets. That's a major challenge we have in the city of maintaining that kind of quality of high-level streetscapes. Understanding, retail, as was just mentioned, the sustainability question is huge, and I'm surprised at how little it's, anchored in the document. And the other major challenge we have, which I think is, Joe mentioned among others, is how do we build critical community spaces? And I think what's interesting in this neighborhood is really created as an island. It's going to be very inward looking, and it's going to be new. And new spaces, in order to build community with real community ties and real strong social networks, need to be built around strong civic functions. So a library, a community center, and those really have to start as the nexus from which the rest of the systems and public spaces and the rest of the connectivity of the community get built. Those really become essential hubs to actually create the essential social networks that in fact make a community viable. So the fact that the civic buildings are kind of the afterthought of, oh, let's put the retail here and let's put, the Woodbine social area, which I'll get to in a second, there, and then, infill where potentially we can put some community spaces. But in fact, I would really hope that along the Largo, along those main areas that naturally will aggregate people, that community services become the most critical element that's being developed, and one of the primary elements that space is reserved for, and like some of the best space, because that's what will really help tie the social networks of the area. In terms of just another thing, looking at Woodbine Boulevard, everything at the moment on the streets are slightly asymmetrical. It's a natural way of drawing streets, but maybe in one looking at sunlight and actually looking even at that Front Street examples from West Donlands that Joe had raised, it doesn't need to be symmetrical. Like one side of the street could have that permission to create a huge linear park. And one of the items in this neighborhood is everywhere you go, you're going to kind of hit a border. And to find one way where you hit a border, you circle up the park and you come back around. So you actually create this strong green loop rather than, going up, hitting the racetrack and like kind of bouncing off, a rigid border between the rail lines, the Highway 27 and the racetracks. So I would encourage you to turn Woodbine Boulevard actually into a much stronger linear park and create that horizontal link. Beyond the swales, I think the swales along the racetracks, that having a more urban green connection, I feel would help, create this sort of center in the area. And just one last item on the green spaces, like where I was looking at the sizing in that slide, I don't think it was in our package, where you're looking at the size of tennis courts and the size of various sports fields. I wasn't sure soccer field would fit in the area. So I'm not sure they have one, much less two. So there are some functions, unless I missed it, but there's some functions that I think, a soccer field, like looking at the parks and thinking of how more mundane rectangular functions could actually fit into some of the spaces that are critical for community activities, would also help. But on the whole, there's a great ambition in this project, and it is certainly aspirational, its intent, and I would really encourage it to continue forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Tima. Last two monitors. First Paul, then Ralph.
Yep, thank you. So I just want to sort of start by sorry, are we okay, Gordon?
Yeah. Hello? Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, go. Okay. All right. Sorry, I wasn't sure if it was working. Yeah. So first off, I really appreciate the kind of mid-rise courtyard forms, generous park access, vibrant streets, all of these elements coming together. The exploration of a kind of purpose-made or custom-tailored mid-rise form that isn't responding to the typical mid-rise guidelines of the main street with the neighborhood in behind. The ambition of the mixed-use, the integrated community facilities, and all of these elements. It's sort of a welcome departure from a lot of the normative stuff, but I think to Joe's point earlier, we can't use a normative process to then enact it. We need to find a way to codify a lot of this through whether policies, documents, guidelines, in a way that's sort of implemented over 30 years. And so I think that's just a critical point, is implementation can't be status quo if we're proposing something of this nature. Second point, and this sort of struck me maybe a little critical presentation, is it really could have benefited from something to describe the scale of this thing. This is the site, not the secondary plan, but the full thing is almost 2 kilometers across. It's kind of like the Portlands or Downsview, and we're talking about it like a secondary plan. And so I don't think we quite appreciate that, and it maybe hurts the way we're all talking about it because we don't quite see those scale comparisons. And there's a sense that there's a bit of a disconnect I'm seeing between some of the bigger TMP work that captures the entire site and the loop, and maybe the last rendering that was added here starts to stitch it together, versus what's happening in the secondary plan that's quite detailed. And so appreciating it's a work in progress, but a sense I'm getting maybe again from a kind of implementation process is that you maybe need a two-tier thing, sort of like Downsview or Portland's, where you had the framework plan that got the big things figured out. Where do your roads go? Where do those LRT stations up? Where are the big major destinations, hubs, nodes? How you stitch them together, but then follow that up with individual district plans where you can kind of dive into the nuance and the detail. So again, a bit maybe more on implementation. Um, the other point is around urban structure, and I'm going to say I'm actually not entirely convinced, because the one diagram that really stood out for me was showing the racetrack itself as this big green urban thing at the core, and the fingers kind of emanating to it. But that's not the reality. It's going to be fenced off, secured, and open at certain hours. And so, in fact, what you've really got is kind of two back edges at the racetrack, and then a similar edge at the kind of parking lots of the GO station, not necessarily destinations. And so, um, what I'm wondering is, maybe there's a different way to kind of reconfigure it, and the sort of swale that's proposed as a kind of, I'm assuming, a linear green buffer, maybe with some active transportation along the GO station. Maybe that gets mimicked on the north edge along the racetrack. So you've got some obvious kind of backs, and then the remaining park, I think it's called the Woodbine Grove, the east-west element of that park, gets reallocated in a way that makes the parks a little more central to each of the neighborhoods. And again, kind of creating a tier hierarchy. The space in between those two is huge. I did a quick check, and um, the one that stood out is Stanley Park, if you know it. It's the sequence that goes from, I think, Adelaide through King Street to Wellington rail corridor and beyond, and that sort of scale of park and its disposition being bisected by east-west streets is something that we could look at. So really about kind of maybe consolidating some of the destinations, the community hubs, the parks, and some of the retail in a more conscious way. Right now, it feels like there's sort of multiple competing public realms between the streets, the park network, and the mid-block connections. And um, want to make sure that we're not spreading ourselves too thin and establishing maybe a bit more of a hierarchy or concentrating those things. And then just lastly, on some of the built form, I touched on the kind of ambition of the mid-rise, really appreciate that. I think the blocks are good. We're starting to get some longer blocks. We saw that with some of the later districts in Downsview. But again, the kind of question of a block like that, how do you make sure that it's got the sort of active, vibrant street edges all around? It can work through, your hands and become Keybridge project in London, but it can also become any of the generic city place blocks that's got a car drop off in the middle, and servicing and loading and garbage pickups, and not have that kind of same vitality. And so I think maybe again pointing back a little bit to the city, is a lot of the success will depend on how we deal with the servicing and being very kind of surgical about parking ramps, and how we maybe right size type G loading requirements and other things like that to get those active frontages around the various edges that we're seeing in the renderings, and just make sure that we can kind of deliver them in reality as this comes through. But again, hats off on the ambition. I just want to make sure that we can get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Ralph?
Okay. I'll try not to repeat anything that everybody said, and try to be as succinct as possible. I want to start by congratulating the team. It's an incredibly ambitious project, so rich, and really needs support. And I wholeheartedly do it. As I mentioned, um, without sounding kind of pessimistic, 25 to 30 years of this scale of master planning and urban design, this is both a breath of fresh air, but I need to kind of give a bit of a cautionary tale, because what we're seeing and what gets executed may not be the same. And so I want to kind of start there. I think Joe talked a little bit about the images that we see are so wonderfully idiosyncratic. The building, the forms, the colors, they're incredibly intoxicating. And then the word flexibility is one of your key principles. By the way, I completely agree with all your ideas and all your principles. And so any of my commentary is all about being able to deliver all those wonderful aspects of your plan. It doesn't look that flexible. It actually looks incredibly custom tailored. The size of buildings, the heights, the variation. And so be careful about the word flexibility, because if we don't get these images in 20 or 30 years when it's built, for various reasons that I will expound, then we've failed. And I can say that, every single master plan we've done or executed or an execution has gone through that churn, and you lose control. And so you either live with the compromises, trying to place a plaque on the site saying, this got manipulated, this doesn't match my original ambition. And so this is so important. At the high level, I believe in this site. I think that we need to put this kind of housing close to employment lands. We have employment lands that are built for car-based workers. We don't necessarily want that any longer. So to put this kind of housing literally chock-a-block next to a whole bunch of large-scale and small-scale employers is incredibly important. And of course, I know that BA is on it. I heard Alan's wonderful accent. That we have a GO station. I don't know if there is the transit to Pearson here, but it's within striking distance, and it's an enormous employer that I think this could support all that employment and is needed to place. So, and I think the fact that it's large and that there's going to be approximately 40,000 people living here, I think has a chance to really create a kind of signature intensification in the kind of edge of Toronto. I know Rexdale incredibly well. I grew up just south of here. It's in dire need of rejuvenation. There needs to be a book written about Woodbine Mall. It's a failed mall, and that's kind of rare in Toronto, built not even 40 years ago by Cadillac Fairview as a signature destination mall, and is just unfortunately on life support. So that's a cautionary tale in itself. The urban design guidelines, I'm going to be really intrigued on seeing those. I have to underline Joe's concern. I dare I say shrink wrapping, but if the intent is to deliver this vision, then I think there needs to be some commitment there. So I'm going to keep going. With regards to Woodbine Social, I hope it never changes. I actually think that it's wonderful that there is this kind of restriction, because actually I think it's kind of one of the major amenities for this neighborhood. And I think it's a wonderful idea. The images of the flexible spaces, the kind of low scale, I think it's an easily achievable in the short term. And actually, I think it'd be almost impossible to redevelop because it's going to become so incredibly well embraced by the community here and maybe even the community at large. I kind of worry about meanwhile use. Meanwhile use for me signifies temporality, not to say that it can't change or won't change, but the spirit of what that is I think, essential. The idea of these flex spaces, these kind of small scale incubators is wonderful. Community amenities, I think that community amenities and retail is where I want to spend some time. you know, in mixed use, at least in Toronto and Ontario and maybe Canada, residential is the easiest of the mix. It's actually kind of not hard. You know, you can make buildings, make them pretty, make them mid-rise, low-rise, high-rise. But I can tell you that community amenities, really hard to deliver. And I think that this plan isn't quite believable because it requires so much of a relationship between the developer builder and the city to integrate, to place sensitively adjacent to other uses. And I wonder whether there should be a rethinking of that. And maybe if there's anything that could be more quote unquote suburban, could be some of these community facilities. Because I just worry that their execution will I'm going to say follow residential intensification to a certain extent, and I'm worried about that execution. No offense to city staff that are here. The hardest, I'm going to say, use within mixed use is retail, and I think that, you know, your three-dimensional visualizations, your animation, shows these wonderful, pretty places, a park with retail on the side, and I can just tell you that we have a challenge retail landscape. We have very few retailers. We have very few food retailers. The big three have kind of eaten all of that up, and then we really struggle here. That we don't have the mature retail offering, and I think also that retail is too generic. There is service retail, commercial retail. And I think that if you are truly trying to create nodes and streets and spaces supported by grade-related amenity, that you really need to understand that. I see, you know, a single depth, and I know it's notional, but, you know, there's different sizes of retailers, different ways to attract those retailers. And there's a kind of magic and kind of, I'm going to say, alchemy to how to attract an LCBO or a pharmacy, or create small retail spaces that are really small and incubator spaces or micro retail. That's not in this plan. I can say that I don't really think that the retail on a double-sided retail on a 36-meter right-of-way is necessarily the way to go. I think it's really a wide right-of-way. It doesn't have that intimacy that I think your images kind of deliver. And so that may change the grade relationship between your built form and become more of a grade-related retail potentially in certain instances. And I'm mainly talking about the north-south part of the Woodbine Boulevard, that I just, you know, this kind of sporadic kind of staccato of retail, I don't think is going to deliver a retail offering. It may deliver service retail, you know, kind of doctor's offices and, you know, those kind of dentists and all those uses. But if you're trying to create a lifestyle retail, and Jihi, I think, talked about that, I think you need to kind of create a cluster. The idea of nodes, I struggle, you know, because for me, in this context, I think a node is built form, program, and space. And I don't see that in the plan. And I think that there's an opportunity in the middle of Park Village. That middle node, I think, should be enlarged. It should have retail that wraps around it and create a kind of node that is a kind of place that people can gather, and that the retailers who need each other and create that kind of ecosystem. That clustering is really important, and I think that you can kind of maybe get a little less kind of consistent retail along the boulevard, could be more consistent commercial space. It may become retail, but I think to conceive of it as something that is a little bit more, I'm going to say, destination based. You go to the doctor, you go to the dentist, I think is a better offering. And then cluster the lifestyle retail around these nodes. The Largo, which I think is more of a Rambla, but you know, I love Largo, so I'm a bit sensitive about that word. But I love Station Street. I think Station Street is actually a better retail street than the Boulevard, and I think that community space at the top of it as a destination maybe can find another location, and it maybe could be a square that you're ending at and have another cluster so that you have these nodes of kind of public realm connectors, destinations in each location. I also think that the one called East Green is completely lacking that. I think its node is again a institutional use, a community space fronting Highway 27, and maybe it should be flipped so that there's a kind of node that comes off of the north-south boulevard. Trying to see if I've caught everything else. Phasing. So I think phasing is absolutely essential to understand how this can succeed. You know, does Woodbine Social get broken down into 3 phases so you can deliver a little bit of there, that place with a place that you spoke about, and then maybe Station Quarter adjacent to it, so that there's a kind of small bites, but I think every bite is not just about parks and nodes, it's about economic viability. And I can't imagine the cost of the infrastructure that is needed here to build these streets and all the kind of services that are below those streets that need to kind of deliver. So I mean, I see it being phased, of course, and how to phase it is, I think, going to be really essential. I want to say that I just love it. Oh, I think that big box retail, you know, if it is a big food store, it's got 3 sides of nothing. So really got to think about what that public realm that you're creating around a food store that seems to not have a front and 3 backs. And so I also think that a 40,000 person neighborhood could have 2 to 3 food stores, different sizes, different flags, different kind of levels of offering. And so I think that retail and commercial needs to be really embedded in here to kind of really be able to deliver it. I buy into this wonderful, accretive looking physical manifestation. I have wounds, 25 years of wounds of losing those battles. So I think it's going to be more than just a secondary plan, and I think more than urban design guidelines if the ambition is to deliver this vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Do I get a degree to listen to that?
Yes. Thank you for staying on for the extended period. I really appreciate it. You've heard lots of great commentary. You know that it's going to come to you in the form of the video. There's going to be a synopsis that Maria's going to provide. Usually at this point, I'm going to provide a summary. I've got lots of points. I don't want to dwell too long because you've heard some great summary material. But, and so maybe I will summarize, because I think you've heard from all panel members their key interests in continuing development. I mean, I'm particularly interested in many of the things that panel members have said, recognizing the fact that there are lots of backs to the development, right? There's the back against the transit, there's the back and commerce or industry, and there's the back against the track. So trying to find a strategy that recognizes that more explicitly, I think is something to look forward to. And then concentration versus distribution. I think many panel members talked about that Central Park having lots of potential success, but what about the division that it may make because of the way that it connects north-south? And finally, many panel members talked about the tendrils and the tendrils having explicit destinations and being more explicit. And maybe that's a way to tie together civic space and nodes in a stronger fashion. But I'm going to let the panel comments stand on their own because that's looked at in detail. And I'll thank panel members for their detailed review. There's no vote, as you know, for this particular session, but I think you've heard strong support for a powerful vision And we look forward to seeing it again as it evolves. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Big part of the team.
Meg is